The following talk by Dr. David Furlong, entitled Working with the Multiple Self, New Insights in Spirit Release Therapy, was given at the Healing, Self-Healing and Spirit Release Conference, organised by Dr. Helen Ford and the Spirit Release Forum. This was held at the Elmfield Rudolf Steiner School, Stourbridge, Worcestershire, UK, in March 2019.
Helen suggested I introduce myself, so hello. Just to give you a bit of a background, I've been involved sort of with spiritual energy all my life because my parents believed in spiritual healing, so I got exposed to it as a very young age. I got interested in all of the esoteric stuff in my late teenage years, reading up George Adamski's Flying Saucers with Landing, and then going on to look at theosophy and various other sort of esoteric studies. And then in my very early 20s met up with other people, weird and wonderful people. We then embarked on an exploration into all of the weird and wonderful. And there was channel guidance which came through from in those early days. So I was exposed to spiritual energy from quite a young age. And I was just reflecting back after Paula's talk, thinking, what was the first actual clearing of the spirit? And it probably goes back to the very early 1970s. So I've been at this area for a long time. And as far as I'm concerned, really when it comes to dealing with spirits in places, spirits attached to areas, I've never found there's any difficulty. You can always easily communicate with them, you can connect to them, you can help them move on. But when it came to dealing with spirits attached to people, then there was a slight difference would occur, because if you sense the spirit was attached to something outside of the person, or so forth, that was fairly easy to clear. But in some cases, clients would come in and saying, well, I've got something dark inside me, can you get rid of it, can you sort it out? And that's where we started to hit the problem. And I was involved with an organisation called Spirit Release Foundation, which is formed by Dr. Alan Sanderson. And we started to look at how we could begin to heal and help what's going on within clients who felt that one level the spirit's been removed but still were experiencing all the symptoms. So what's going on? I've entitled this talk, Working with the Multiple Self, because this has been a sort of ongoing revelation, if you like, over the past 20 years of trying to understand what's going on within our inner world and how we can begin to help heal that part. And I'm going to suggest to you that you're all multiple personalities. And you tend to think of yourself, this is me, this is David. But actually what I know, and come to know now in greater depth, there's lots of bits of David. I have different characters, not all male either. But parts can come forward at different times to work through me. And in a sense, as I'm speaking to you now, there is a part of me that is the communicator, or the talker. Another part will deal with different things. If I'm writing, the writer part. Now we think, because these bits flow so easily within us, that actually we're all one part, all one person. But it becomes very easy when you start to communicate with people to begin to recognise that there are parts going on within them. So, there we are, there's one individual. But I'm going to suggest to you in this room, there is, each one of you has probably got a whole load of parts of yourself. These parts don't necessarily have to have any problems. They can all be very happy. You can be a wonderful inner family. And some parts will have particular roles to fulfill within yourself. And not to be sexist, of course we can have men and women, it's both the same. And it's understanding, first of all, that we have all of these characters within us. And that seems strange. And when I'm talking about within us, and looking at these characters, what we're looking at is aspects of consciousness, parts of ourselves which are real characters. just like Paula is a real character. But there could be an in part inside of me, which is a Paula part, which is aware, conscious, has its own understanding and perception. Now this raises up all sorts of interesting problems. So the parts within us, how do they operate? What goes on? Is there any validity for all of this? Well, in fact, when you go through the literature, there is a lot of research that's gone on with clients who are working through psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, and so forth. And these parts are being referred to by different names. For example, parts is a term which Richard Schwartz uses in his internal family systems therapy. As his therapy started very simply because he was a family therapist, he was working particularly with some bulimic clients, and one of his bulimic clients, when he was asking what was going on, one of his bulimic clients, well, this part of me makes me do this. Well, that's intriguing. Part makes it. So he then started to think, can I dialogue with this part? And amazingly, he found he could. He could get her to begin to communicate with the part without actually going into a very deep trance. And that's been something which has been also quite revelatory from my perspective. It's very easy to dialogue with the parts of oneself, and also with the clients that you work with. You just ask them to be aware of the part. But other terms have been put to it. I used to like the term subpersonalities, probably still do. Ego states, Watkins, alters, broad. If you go through the psychological literature, you will find these different names are referring to the parts of us. So, what has all this got to do with spirit release and all of that side? Well, one of the other things which is in psychology now, we keep talking about the self, or the essential self. And this satisfies psychologists, because if I use the word soul, there's an implication that there's a part of me that goes on and exists after death. But if I use the word self, then that, from a psychological perspective, that can terminate just at the end of the life. But I also think all of us have an essential self, a soul part, which is what Helen was talking about. And I would tend to call this the core self. We also have another aspect of ourselves, which I'll come on to later, which I would call the higher self. So from my perspective, there's a self that's anchored in the body, and there's a self that's anchored in the spiritual world. And as we go through this talk, I want to show you how important these two parts are in the therapeutic process. Now these parts, quite a lot of them get brought into existence in childhood through trauma. So to protect the inner core part of ourselves, if a child is experiencing trauma at some level, it will split off a bit of itself to hold the trauma. And usually that split off part is stuck at the age when the trauma occurred. So if you can imagine a child getting subjected to abuse, they're going to have a lot of split off bits. Just check the last. Oh yes, I just actually referred to a few other things about this. So again, psychotherapists working through these things have actually identified quite a number of different types of parts which sit within us, characters which sit within us. One of the things that I hadn't appreciated, of course, in my therapeutic journey of working with clients, was recognising these parts existed and working with the part. So I might work with the Helen part or whatever, is there. What I hadn't, maybe there was all the trauma you were talking about from your mother and so forth, so we've got a traumatised bit there which has occurred. What I hadn't appreciated, of course, there were other parts of the psyche which were looking after these parts. So you can see it begins to start getting complicated, doesn't it? Because there could be a Paula part which was looking after the Helen part, to try to make sure that the Helen part was either kept under control or didn't get too agitated or out of balance. And this complexity starts to build up within the psyche. So I would suggest maybe some of these parts, the perpetrators or the avengers and so forth, maybe some of those actually are spirits which have got into the psyche, which have destructive energies. What is clear, I'm absolutely certain, is that you can get spirits attached to the parts, and it's those spirits which can then create problems for the parts. And a little survey of dissociative identity disorder cases reported that at least 50% were able to identify 10 parts within themselves. In some cases, they had up to 100. So these are probably traumatized parts. And in fact, in one particular case, they went up to 4,500. So if I've got to think as a therapist, I'm healing the parts of the person, and I'm dealing with 4,500 parts, this is going to take a bit of time, isn't it? This is not just going to be a short 1 hour session. I see my clients on hour sessions, and most of my clients are recurring clients. So in other words, they come back for sessions at a certain frequency, or regularity. But I wanted to try to build for you the idea that we are complex inside of ourselves and begin to understand something of that complexity. So, just again, picking up one thing about the fragility of our early life. Science tells us that the brain doesn't actually fully mature until about the age of 30. And it's curious that Rudolf Steiner said the soul is not fully incarnated into the body until about 28, 30. So there's a whole period of time where we can be very susceptible. Children can be very susceptible to all sorts of influences, particularly trauma, but also nowadays drugs, alcohol, maybe overdoing it on the tablets and so forth. All of this can start to create issues and problems or distortions within the psyche. And what happens is that when a trauma occurs, the soul part splits off a bit of itself to hold that trauma. And so that split off bit has soul energy within it, and because it has soul energy within it, it has free will. So this means you cannot just override it. You cannot just try to pretend it doesn't exist. That free will consciousness needs to be acknowledged. Again, just off this slide, we can just show how easily you get some child abuse going on, you start to get lots of fragmented parts that occur. So, what I'm suggesting to you is, all of you, at least I would almost guarantee all of you, I can't be absolutely certain, but I certainly know for myself that I had a lot of traumatized parts of me, which I've had to work on and look at. And those parts can be open and susceptible to having spirits attached to them. Whether those spirits are benign spirits or malign spirits. And I will separate this out as we go through, because there is a distinction. So you can get some spirits which are just lost, which are attached to people. You can get some spirits which are deliberately malign, which want to keep them stuck. So what would be a healthy psyche? So here we are, just a fit individual. If you can see it, having a nice clear aura. The client turns up, wonderful aura, nice, bright. And anchored within them, somewhere within their part, is their core self, their soul energy. Nicely located, should be close to the area of the heart. Worth checking out if you're working with a client. Where is your soul located? Going back in time, I used to find regularly, they'd say, oh, it's in my head, or it's in my belly. But this starts to create problems. If it's in the head, they're obviously not grounded. So how do you help them ground? And connection to the higher self. How many of you think about or aware of or work with your higher self? Some? Great. Excellent. Because for me, working with clients, connecting them to their higher self is one of the most important parts of the therapeutic process. It's where I will start, almost, when I'm working with them. Can we get good connection? to the higher self. And of course, in this individual, you've got a nice group of happy bits, all there working together, collaborating as one nice family. But what about the unhealthy psyche? Something like stress and so forth. Probably if you looked at him psychically, his whole auric energy would be grey, partly broken up maybe. You would find that his inner soul part is not properly anchored within himself. He has no sense of connection to that higher, wise part of him. And also you start to find there's a lot of traumatized, split-off bits within his psyche, which he's periodically. See, what happens with these split-off bits is the primary ego bit of David is here talking, and suddenly a traumatized bit gets agitated by something going on and takes over. So you get the traumatized bit suddenly step into the psyche and start to agitate things. People go into panic attacks, all of those things, because in some senses, a part of themselves has taken over the psyche, which is then affecting what's going on within them. And of course, what we can find is you can get a whole series of entities which are attached to them. I've shown them as dark. Well, they don't all have to be dark. Some are within the psyche, and some are outside it. And there's a distinction. This is what was talked about, wasn't it? You can think of spirits which are stuck in places, spirits which are attached to the sort of energy field, and spirits which actually get inside the psyche because they attach to the parts of us. And that's one of the crucial bits of this process. So I've said, broadly speaking, I think spirits fall into two categories. One of which are benign, and one of which are malign. Now, benign spirits are spirits which inherently are just lost. They are the ones that get stuck because they don't recognize the importance of moving back into the light. But they're not inherently evil in the sense of trying to cause destruction within the self. So when you connect to a benign spirit within the person, it's quite easy to begin to help them move on. And the simple process is first of all to get them to recognize there is a light inside of them, communicate them, there's a light inside them, and you also have a higher self. But if I'm working with them, I ask their higher self to help. Very quickly, very easily, they move back into the light. However, sad to relate, there is another whole group of spirits which are stuck in the shadow. They are dark. And their sole intent is to try to cause disruption within the psyche. And that can cause a lot of stress for individuals. And they are the cases that I struggle with the most. Finding out the methodologies that can work to clear these types of spirits. And the difficulty is dark spirits will do everything to remain hidden, to disguise themselves, and then do everything not to be released. And they have all sorts of tricks up their sleeves. So, if we come on to look at spirits, how they can be attached in the psyche, we can just throw up a few. A little soul gets split off part. Now, so this is an interesting split off part. Sometimes what happens is an internal part becomes so disruptive within the self that it gets split off. Imagine yourself as a house. So you've got little Johnny in the house who's getting so causing so much havoc, or an adolescent teenager, you say, go, get out, can't stand you any longer. And these parts get ejected from the psyche. And they're in trauma, because they probably want to get back, but if the psyche can't hold it, then it will eject them. And sometimes we can get entities, dark entities attached, but also we get a whole group inside of ourselves. And here, one of the things that crops up is people get entangled with dark energy from past lives. You come into this life, you might have trauma in childhood, very often it is, but then if you get hooked into some trigger that goes on, and a whole past life memory of some entanglement with dark energy comes in, and you find then you have a whole gateway comes into the psyche that starts to create these problems. And once that gateway is open, it allows other dark energies to come in. So you can get a lot of fracturing or fragmenting which is going on within the self. The key is, how do we heal all these bits? Healing the psyche. Well, in this particular case, if you've got an attachment, as I said, I will call upon the higher self of the attachment. I will try to help you get in touch with its inner light, and then you can begin to help release it. They go quite easy, not too difficult. And if we got a split-off bit, again, I will communicate. See, in a way, the higher self knows all of what's going on with the psyche. So if I'm communicating with the higher self, it highlights where these bits are. So it tells me there's a split-off bit there. We connect to it through the client. I'm working with the client face to face in this sense, just talking to them, getting them into perhaps a light altered state of consciousness, but they don't have to go very deep, and they can begin to communicate with these parts, detect split-off bit. We send it healing. I call upon its higher self to help it, because its higher self may be the same as the psyche's primary higher self, but if we can communicate to that higher self, you can help this part become integrated. And again, picking up what Paul has said, I will always then send a lot of healing to the part that's integrated. Once it's begun to understand what's going on, once it's begun to release some of its pain and suffering, and that can sometimes cause a cathartic reaction in the client, then you begin to resolve what's going on. And again, dark entities, if they're attached, they generally attach to something, so you've got to find out what they're attached to. But if you can remove that attachment, then according on being of light, you can quite easily remove them. So we're going through a process where looking at clearing the energy in the outside is not so difficult. If you know the technique, you can clear the energy outside. Clearing the energy inside becomes more tricky and more difficult, particularly if there's some form of dark entity involved. And the two core bits, two key bits in this process is one, how do you help the person be in touch with their core self, a sense of the true heart within them? Because the difficulty is that part will often be obscured by these traumatized subpersonality bits. So it's clearing the way so that core part can operate, and secondly, helping them connect through to the higher self. And it's recognizing how that can be established in a way that becomes meaningful to the client. Because I can talk to a client, oh, get in touch with your higher self. I might say, well, picking out everything. But I now know I need to be absolutely sure that they are understanding what I mean by the higher self. How do they conceptualize the higher self? How can they conceptualize that there's a part of them which has the answers and the power to change what's going on inside? Now the difficulty is the higher self will not heal the subpersonality per se if the subpersonality doesn't want to be healed. So if the subpersonality says, I'm going to attach this entity, I don't want to let it go, the higher self won't just rip it out. What the higher self asks us to do is to communicate with that part. And to give you an example, detecting in one of the clients a dark spirit, so we then did some work to remove it. Didn't go. If the higher self can remove it, it will. Didn't go. So we asked the higher self, where's what's the angle, what's been connected to? And the higher self immediately identified a 4-year-old part, and this 4-year-old part talking with him. He's my friend. I don't want him to go. I was in a state of trauma at 4, and this spirit turned up, and he's been my friend ever since. So we then had to communicate with the 4-year-old part to help the 4-year-old part begin to recognize that she could let go of this spirit. And she said, please tell me that he won't be hurt or harmed. So we had to reassure her that that was okay. She was able to bring a lot of healing to her, and a guide came to assist her. So that's the sort of thing which can go on in this inner world. And I thought I'd just give you an example of someone I saw this week. Just checking all the time. So this particular client I've been working with for quite some time. She has a relatively good connection to her core self, relatively good connection to her higher self. So we can call on this. It's a woman in her 50s in this particular session. Something had come up in the week, and I asked her to scan through and identify what the two issues were. And she immediately identified with a 15-year-old part of herself. So she was in touch, started to talk to this 15-year-old, got a sense of this 15-year-old part of her. But she felt she was all surrounded in grey, very sort of grey energy around her. And then, as she tuned in further, she got a sense that there was something dark attached to her. So that was the first part, if you like. And then she identified a sort of another grey area that she couldn't really discern, but she had a sense as well that there were some things attached to this part. So, working with the higher self said, well, we'll work with the part that came first. So the very first thing we did, communicate with the higher self, she herself said a lot of love and healing to this 15-year-old part of her, just to see what's going on. And as she did this, something of this grey colour started to dissipate from her. And then I asked the higher self to see whether there is anything attached to this, other than this dark energy. Was there anything attached to the 15-year-old? And when we did this, first of all, a character emerges out of this 15-year-old, and it transpires this is an old man. So she has this man that's attached to this 15-year-old part. So we send a lot of healing to the man, and I asked to get in touch with his higher self. So his higher self turns up, I get him aware of his inner light, and he's able then to move back into the spiritual world. So he's clear, he's gone. But we're still left with this dark entity which was attached. Now at this point, of course, the dark entity has nothing to attach to. So I can call upon the higher self and say to the higher self, okay, just remove this entity. But my approach at the moment is actually to offer these entities a choice. So I say to these entities, okay, you're going to have to go now. There's no way that you can stay here. And there's two places you can go to. You can either go back into the dark, and I can assure you if you go back into the dark, you're going to end up being punished. Because those dark beings, that's what they're into. They're controlled through fear and punishment. Or maybe you might be interested in going into the light. And usually at these points, these dark beings start to think about this a little bit more. And I say, of course, you need to remember that within you, there has to be a light. Are you aware of the light inside of yourself? And these dark beings sort of think about it a bit. But generally speaking, with a little bit of persuasion, spending a bit of time, you can clear that. And you find that the vast bulk of these dark beings are quite happy to go back into the light when they're presented with the choice of going back, because those taskmasters have said, Don, you've got to do this, and if you don't do it, you'll have problems. When you fail, in the sense that this character has, then it has to face the consequences of that. And, those taskmasters are pretty hard. So the other character we managed to work on then revealed itself as a man carrying a lot of anger. And what the client recognised was this character was carrying all her anger and hatred from her childhood. So there's probably more than one bit. Well, we did some work to clear some of these bits. Again, release some dark entities. But because we couldn't clear it all up, I said I had normally an hour session. So by this time we got round to the close on to the hour. What we had to do is encapsulate this part and say we will come back at a later stage to do some work to clear this up. Four clients yesterday, and every single one of them had a dark entity attached to them. Quite difficult stuff. But the process is that if you can get the client in touch with their higher self, and you can get them in touch with their inner core self, then you can begin to free up what those issues are. You can begin to identify them, and then you can begin to help. And that's the tricky bit. And so one of one of the things which I tried to really find and develop is what causes the blocks to some of the clients from accessing the higher self, because if they can get contact, it becomes very easy to clear this up. But bear in mind, of course, that you don't do this in one session. One session I might deal with a part and something attached to that part. The next week there will be another part and the aspects are attached there. So some of the clients I've been working with now, probably I've been working with them over several years, some of them, not all of them, but it just shows the complexity of what's going on in our inner world. And what happens is when you take a layer off, something else comes to the surface. So don't think that if someone comes along or just got spirit, get rid of it, they're going to be fine, because they're not. It's generally speaking that there's other layers going on which all have to be dealt with because of the complexity of our inner world. So just as a summary to all of this, I suggest to you we're all multiple personality characters. And we all have a number of parts, as well as the part we identify with our primary ego. We have a core self, and really getting in contact with your core self is important in this process. And we also have a higher self. And our higher self is anchored in the spiritual world. So it has access to all the wisdom and knowledge from that spiritual world. And we can draw that spiritual wisdom and knowledge into ourselves and help us to balance what's going on within us. And again, just say that spirits can be attached to the outer layers, and I think if they're attached to the outer layers, healers, mediums and so forth, can relatively easily clear those sorts of energies. But the only way I know to clear this inner world stuff is working face to face with the client. I mean, it is possible, perhaps, if you were going to spend time tuning in, you might be able to work something. I mean, if there was a client who was very difficult to get direct connection to, it may be possible over a period of time to heal those inner world bits. But you need to understand those inner world bits in order to heal them. Because it's actually also it's the resolution within the client which becomes important. They can feel empowered by doing this inner work. So I've just about got that in half an hour. There's probably some questions. Have we got a bit of time for some questions?
I think we have, yeah.
I know, you've got it. Do you think medication has a role in helping this sort of healing?
Well, it's for sure, when you read the literature, medication can be helpful. I've not found per se, that once I've gotten to establish a connection for higher self, the medication is a problem. It doesn't get in the way. Clients can still communicate and connect to the parts which have got the issues. In my experience. I mean, maybe if someone was very, very heavily medicated, then it may be difficult. But most of the clients who can come to see me are not that very difficult.
Resolve those issues, they still need the higher self work, so you don't think medication could really get rid of the negative energies?
I think these things need to be resolved from within, and I think it needs the higher self to help, particularly if you're dealing with dark energy, because it would do everything to block. There's contracts. You've got to think about, well, why is this dark entity there? What's the contract which has been set up? And you've got to break this contract, because these dark entities have been at it for a long time. They know ways of tracking souls. So just, again, read some of the literature about it. So those contracts need to be cleared and severed and understood in different ways.
Yeah, when you work with the client, are you communicating with the higher self through the client, or are you doing it mediumistically?
Through the client. I'm all the time wanting the client to be aware of what's going on. I'm tuning into my higher self, so I'm also working with my psychic perspectives and so forth. But I'm asking the client to be aware of their connections to
So
higher
they
self.
have to be in a sort of altered state of consciousness for that?
Actually, the amazing thing is, you don't need to be very deep there. It's like altered state, yes, for sure. But you don't need to go into a deep trance in order to make these connections. It's just the belief and understanding you can connect to the higher self. So a person is relaxed, communicating. You ask, what's the higher self bring forward, and the house will give you insight. So it brings up something straight away.
David, when you were actually talking about the dark entities and stuff, you said that they use the words, they have the task. They have been assigned a task. And I wondered how much of the individual who incarnates also has a task to connect to those entities, or it could be healing ancestors, or healing past lives left within itself.
Yeah.
So there's a whole sense. It's not a random process. I know this attachment in some ways is random. There is a plan, you know.
Yeah, I mean, to give an
you
example.
have a part of, you know,
Yeah.
you are very aware of
Yeah,
something.
yeah. To give an example, one of the clients I was working with, and I've worked with quite a lot on this thing, but it's just amazing what comes out. So again, I did some more work with this client yesterday to really try to clear this connection with myself and ask. And I became aware that there's some things blocking here. She became aware that there were some things trying to block and so forth. So there was some dark energy that was trying to block it, but then when we tracked it back, there was some protective energy that was attached to her soul. So we then asked the higher self to help her begin to separate out this protective energy. And this could have proved to be a male energy. First of all, appeared like a Neo in the, in that, what was it, the Matrix or whatever. So we actually like this Neo character. But of course, when you start to then challenge it and find out what's going on, he was definitely a dark entity. And of course, when we sussed him and brought him out, he became then very agitated. He said, but I'm only a protector, I'm trying to help. But actually, who set you up? And of course, he had been told, and what he actually relayed was, he had been with this client for not only this life, but a number of other lives. So there was some form of contract which had gone on over those lifetimes where he had got entangled in all this, but he had a task. His task was to keep an eye on this soul and make sure this soul went through difficulties and problems. Maybe because the soul itself felt that's what she needed to go through, but perhaps also because that was the task this entity had been given. And of course, as soon as she comes back into a new life, this entity picks up that resonance straight onto it. This is, I'm going to hang on to this part. And generally what you have, I reckon people who've had traumatized childhoods have probably got some entanglement with dark energy in the previous life. So it's problematic. I think, what do you think?
David, if the higher self has the ability to eject dark entities, as you call them,
Yeah.
doesn't it also have the ability to not allow me as the first one?
Well, the higher self, first of all, will only act when it's asked to act. So your higher self, what happens with my understanding, we have a spirit. And I sometimes talk about this as, like, imagine your spirit is like a great cake in the sky. So your spirit is this cake. And what happens in any lifetime, it puts a sliver of itself, a slice of the cake comes into the body. So the bit that's in the spiritual world is your spirit, and the bit inside of you is the soul bit which hangs within you. And that has a task. And it has free will. Because at every stage, once you spit off something, it has free will. So once it's inside here, it might have a plan or purpose or an understanding of what it wants to achieve. And the higher self sits in the background, monitoring that situation, but not interfering with it, unless we ask for help. Unless we specifically ask for help. So I think the responsibility comes back also to us being here in the physical body. How do we balance our energy? How do we deal with all the things which are going on with us? And then when we need help, how do we call upon the higher self to assist us in determining? Because the higher self won't sort out, little David's 4-year-old heart. I have to do that. What the higher self will tell me is you've got a 4.5-year-old traumatized bit. How do you begin to help heal? How can I bring a sense of love and understanding to that part? How can I help that part begin to recognize it has a life inside it, so it can connect to the higher self? And then it begins to free up and clear up whatever the trauma is. Does that make sense? Sort of.
As far as I can take it, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think probably I ought to sit down now and hand you over to...
Thank you, David.
For contact details for David Furlong, please visit www.davidfurlong.co.uk.